We're going to start with new information that we got just in the last 30 minutes about a deadly shooting in Mesquite. Police have named a suspect. It's 42-year-old Christopher Whitt. He is now wanted for the death of Keisha Hilliard, who was found inside her home that was on Avis Circle over the weekend. Brazeda Holguin sitting down with the family this afternoon.
3 words came from the mouth of a child who barely knew how to count to 10. 3 words that should never live in a toddler's brain. 3 words that would put a man behind bars and shatter 2 families into pieces that could never be put back together. Daddy killed Kesha, October 12, 2025, Mesquite, Texas. A mother of 5 children lay dead on the floor of her own home, shot once through the forehead. In the next room, her 6-month-old baby cried for milk, for comfort, for the mama who would never come. A 3-year-old boy stood nearby, his tiny ears still ringing from the explosion of gunfire so close it felt like his head might split open. And the man who pulled the trigger, the man whose finger decided that life should end, that was the person those babies called Daddy. This was not a crime of passion, not a moment where anger burned too hot and hands moved before brains could stop them. This was not about a fight that accidentally crossed a line nobody meant to cross. This was about a man who looked directly into the eyes of a woman he had shared a bed with, a woman who cooked meals for his child, a woman who washed his clothes and knew how he liked his coffee, and decided in that moment that her life had no value at all. Outside the house, Halloween decorations swayed in the October breeze. Orange pumpkins with carved smiles sat on the porch. Fake cobwebs stretched across the doorframe. Black cats and friendly ghosts hung in the windows. The kind of home that looked safe if you drove past it. The kind of neighborhood where children rode bicycles and people waved to their neighbors. But inside those walls, Keisha Hilliard was bleeding out on the floor with a single bullet hole in her forehead, while her babies screamed for help that would arrive too late to matter. The man who did this gathered up those children, the 6-month-old and the 3-year-old, and put them in his car. No diapers, no bottles for the baby who needed to eat every few hours. No favorite blanket for the toddler who could not sleep without it. No toys, no explanation, nothing. He drove them to his parents' house, dropped them on the doorstep like packages nobody ordered, and disappeared into the Texas night. For 11 days he was a ghost. Nobody could find him. Police searched. Federal marshals hunted. News stations showed his picture. For 11 days, Kesha's mother woke up every morning knowing her daughter was gone and the person responsible was somewhere out there breathing free air. For 11 days, Kesha's children asked where Mama was, and nobody had words that would make the answer hurt less. For 11 days, a 3-year-old boy carried the weight of what he had witnessed, a memory so heavy it would press down on his chest for the rest of his life. This is the story of Keisha Hilliard, the mother who should still be planting flowers in her garden and watching her babies grow. This is the story of red flags that nobody saw waving until police officers were putting yellow tape around a crime scene. This is the story of a question so controversial that most people would rather look away than answer it honestly. When a man shows you who he really is in private, behind closed doors where nobody else can see, why do we only believe the version of him that he shows in public? Why do we trust the smile he wears at family dinners more than the fists he makes when the doors are locked? Why does it take a body on the floor before we admit we should have been paying closer attention? Keisha Hilliard was 42 years old. She had 5 children who needed her. She had a mother who called her every Friday just to hear her voice. She had friends who counted on her. She had a garden where she grew tomatoes and flowers because watching things come to life brought her peace. She had dreams about what her life could become, plans for next month and next year and the decade after that. All of that ended with one bullet, one decision, one man who thought he had the right to erase her from existence. And the only witness who could tell the complete truth about what happened in that house was a 3-year-old boy who would spend the rest of his childhood trying to forget what his father made him see. Keisha Hilliard was 42 years old and living her life with the kind of loudness that comes from knowing exactly who you are. Independent designer, businesswoman, the kind of woman who had dirt caked under her fingernails most days from working in her garden, hands deep in soil, planting seeds and watching them become something beautiful. That was what brought her peace, watching things grow, nurturing life from the ground up. 5 children called her Mama. Not just one or two, but 5 whole human beings that she poured every ounce of herself into every single day. Her oldest daughter, Spain, would tell anyone who asked, and plenty of people who did not ask, that her mother was the best mother who ever existed. She always put her kids first. That was not an exaggeration or the kind of thing people say to make the dead sound better than they were. That was truth. Kesha lived for those children. The baby was just 6 months old, still in that delicate stage where mama's literally everything. Food, warmth, comfort, safety, the entire universe. The 3-year-old was at that age where he was learning to string words together into sentences, learning to understand how the world worked, what things meant, why people did the things they did. And there were 3 more children, older but no less dependent on her, for food, for comfort, for safety, for the sense of identity that comes from knowing your mother loves you unconditionally. Christopher Whitt was 42 years old, the exact same age as Kesha. They had been together for years in one of those relationships that never quite ended cleanly. They would break up, get back together, break up again, patch things over. The kind of cycle where the breaks never quite stuck because there were always reasons to try one more time. That 6-month-old baby crying in the crib, that was theirs together. The 3-year-old learning to form sentences, that was his son from a previous relationship. But Kesha had stepped into that child's life and raised him like he came from her own body. That was the kind of woman she was. The kind who loved children who were not technically hers because love does not require blood to be real. Here is what is going to destroy anyone who hears this story. Nobody saw it coming. Not one single person in Kesha's family looked at Christopher Whitt and thought that man is dangerous. Kesha's mother Donna said it herself, clear as day, with the kind of confusion that comes from having the entire world you thought you understood revealed to be a lie. There were no signs of trouble. None. The family never saw Christopher be aggressive. Not once. Never saw red flags waving in the wind trying to warn them. Never had that gut feeling, that instinct that screams something is dangerously wrong here. Friday, October 10th, 2025. Donna talked to her daughter on the phone. A normal conversation, the kind that happens 1,000 times between mothers and daughters. Checking in. How are you doing? How are the kids? Everything good? Everything was fine. Kesha was good. The kids were good. Life was moving forward the way life does when nothing seems particularly wrong. Saturday came. Donna tried to reach Kesha. The phone rang and rang, but nobody picked up. She tried again. Still nothing. Now, we all miss calls sometimes. We get busy with work or errands or children. We put our phones down and forget where we left them. Life happens and calls get missed. That is normal, but Donna felt something shift inside her chest, something heavy that settled there and would not let her rest. Something just was not right in my heart, she said later when she tried to explain what that feeling was like. That is mother's instinct right there, that knowing that lives somewhere deeper than logic. Every parent reading this or listening to this understands exactly what that means. That fear that starts as a whisper in the back of your mind and grows louder until it is screaming. That sensation that creeps up your spine when you cannot reach your child and every cell in your body is telling you something is wrong. Sunday morning, October 12th. Spain talked to her mama on the phone. They had a conversation. Normal, mundane. The kind of talk you forget about 5 minutes after it ends because you assume, you know without question, that there will be 1,000 more conversations just like it. Spain did not know it yet, but that phone call was the last time she would ever hear her mother's voice. The last words, the last laugh, the last everything, and then everything went to hell. Between that Sunday morning phone call and what came next, something happened inside Christopher Whitt's head. Some switch flipped, or some wire crossed, or some darkness that had always been there finally pushed its way to the surface. He did something so terrible in that house on Ava's Circle that he knew immediately he could not stay, could not explain it, could not face what he had done, could not look at it in the daylight and pretend it was anything other than what it was. So he gathered up that 6-month-old baby and that 3-year-old boy, picked them up with whatever clothes they were wearing, and put them in the car. No diaper bag for the baby who would need changing in a few hours. No bottles for the infant who would get hungry and scream. No supplies at all, not a single thing. He drove straight to his parents' house with those two children in the back seat. He dropped them off like they were packages being delivered. No explanation. No details. Just handed them over and left. Walked away. Disappeared. His sister knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. This was not normal behavior. You do not just drop off babies with nothing. No diapers, no bottles, no toys, no explanation, nothing. You do not hand over children and walk away without words. She called him. Called again. Finally, he picked up the phone. And this is what he told her. Just these words, cold and factual. He had hurt Hillard. Hurt Hillard. Not there was an accident. Not something terrible happened. Not you need to sit down because I have to tell you something awful. Just hurt Hillard. Like it was an action he had performed with full consciousness and intent. Like he was reporting something he had done the same way you might say, I went to the store or I ate breakfast. His sister drove to their parents' house as fast as she could to check on those babies. When she got there, the 6-month-old was crying that desperate cry that babies make when they are hungry or uncomfortable or need their mother. The kind of cry that pulls at something deep inside every human who hears it. The 3-year-old stood there looking confused, his little face showing the kind of bewilderment that comes from not understanding why the world suddenly makes no sense. He was probably wondering where Kesha was, where Daddy went, why nobody was explaining anything in words he could understand. And then that baby, that 3-year-old child who was still learning how to use the bathroom by himself and how to tie his shoes, opened his mouth and said 3 words that would crack this entire case wide open. Daddy killed Kesha. A 3-year-old, barely out of diapers, still young enough that he probably believed in Santa Claus and thought monsters only lived under the bed. And he was telling his aunt, in words so simple and clear there could be no misunderstanding, that his father was a murderer. Christopher Whitt's sister did not waste a single second. She did not hesitate or second guess or wonder if maybe the child was confused or making things up the way children sometimes do. She grabbed her phone and called 911 immediately. She requested a welfare check on Kesha Hillard. Someone needed to go to that house right now. Someone needed to find out what happened. Someone needed to get there before it was too late, if it was not already too late. The clock was ticking, and somewhere in that house on Avis Circle, Kesha Hillard was lying on the floor with a bullet hole in her forehead, already gone, while her baby's voices echoed through empty rooms asking where Mama was. Sunday afternoon, October 12th, 2025. Just after 4:15 in the afternoon, Mesquite police officers pulled up to the house on Avis Circle in their patrol cars, engines still running, radios crackling with dispatch chatter. Halloween decorations still hung outside like nothing was wrong. Orange and black streamers twisted in the breeze. Spooky faces carved into plastic pumpkins grinned from the porch. Fake cobwebs stretched across the doorframe like party decorations. The kind of decorations that are supposed to be fun, scary. The pretend kind that makes children giggle and parents hand out candy. Not real scary. Not the kind of horror that was waiting inside those walls. Ring video from a neighbor's house caught it all. The footage showed an officer walking across Kesha's front lawn, his boots crunching on the grass, his hand resting on his belt the way police officers do when they are not sure what they are about to walk into. He approached the door, knocked, waited, no answer. Knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. No sound from inside. No footsteps approaching. No voice calling out to say, just a minute or who is it? The officers made entry into the home. The door opened. They stepped inside. And there she was, Kesha Hillard, 42 years old, mother of 5 children who needed her, designer, businesswoman, gardener, daughter, friend, lying motionless on the floor with a single gunshot wound to her forehead. One shot, clean, clinical, execution style. The kind of shot that says this was not an accident, not a struggle where hands fought over a weapon and it went off by mistake. This was murder with intention. This was someone standing over another human being, pointing a gun at their face, and pulling the trigger with full knowledge of what that action would do. One bullet to the forehead and Kesha was gone. Just like that. 5 children's lives destroyed in the time it takes to blink. A mother's worst nightmare confirmed. The thing Donna had felt in her chest, that heaviness that would not let her rest, that instinct that told her something was catastrophically wrong, had been right. A family shattered beyond any possibility of being put back together. You cannot repair this kind of broken. You can only learn to live around the pieces. But here is what is going to haunt everyone involved in this case for the rest of their lives. That 3-year-old boy did not just know what happened. He did not just hear it from another room or see the aftermath when it was already over. He saw it. He was there. He was standing so close to the gunfire that the explosion damaged his ears, that boom that rattles your skull and makes everything sound muffled and wrong for hours afterward. He told forensic interviewers later, when they sat him down in a room designed to look friendly and non-threatening, and asked him questions in gentle voices, exactly what he had witnessed. He described it in language a toddler should not know, should not have words for. He watched Christopher Whitt shoot and kill Keisha Hilliard. Make it make sense. Try to explain it in a way that does not make your stomach turn. How do you do that in front of a child? In front of your own child? How do you pull a trigger knowing a baby is watching you commit murder? Knowing that image, that sound, that smell of gunpowder and blood is going to be burned into his brain forever? Knowing he is going to need years of therapy, maybe decades, just to begin to process what you forced him to witness? Knowing you are destroying that child's sense of safety and trust in the exact same moment you are destroying another human's life? That little boy is going to grow up carrying weight that no child should ever have to carry. He is going to have nightmares that wake him up screaming in the dark. He is going to have flashbacks that hit him when he least expects them. Sudden memories that feel like they are happening all over again. He is going to have trauma responses to loud noises for the rest of his life. A door slamming, a car backfiring, fireworks on the 4th of July. All of it will send him right back to that moment when he stood too close to gunfire and watched his father kill the woman who had been raising him. And one day when he is old enough to understand what he saw, when he is old enough to ask the questions that have been building inside him since he was 3 years old, he is going to ask things that nobody can answer in a way that makes any of this okay. Where is my mama? Where is my dad? That is what Spain said those children would have to ask, and she is absolutely right. That baby and his siblings are going to have to grow up explaining to teachers and friends, and eventually their own children someday, why they do not have a mother. Why the man who was supposed to protect them, who was supposed to be their safe place in a dangerous world, is the reason she is gone. The investigation went late into the evening. Officers processing the scene under artificial lights that made everything look harsh and clinical, collecting evidence, taking photographs from every possible angle, bagging and tagging items that might tell them something about what happened in that house, trying to piece together a timeline, a sequence of events, a story that would hold up in court. But they already knew who did it. They already had their suspect. Christopher Whitt's own family had pointed them in his direction. His own sister had made the phone call. His own son, 3 years old, had told them the truth in words so simple there could be no misunderstanding. By nightfall, as the sun set over Mesquite and families across the city were sitting down to Sunday dinner, Christopher Whitt was officially classified as a fugitive. A manhunt was underway. Mesquite Police Department, Dallas County Sheriff's Office, United States Marshals Service, everyone looking for one man who had murdered his partner in front of their children and then ran like a coward, disappearing into the night as if he could outrun what he had done. Here is where the story gets messy, where it stops being a simple tale of good versus evil and becomes something more complicated and more terrifying. Keisha's family, her mother Donna, who had that terrible feeling in her chest, her brother Malcolm, who would have protected her if he had known she needed protecting, they all said the exact same thing when police asked them about Christopher Whitt. We never saw him be aggressive. Not once. Not ever. Not at family dinners or birthday parties or any of the hundreds of moments when they were all together in the same room. So how does a man hide that level of rage? How does someone successfully mask the capacity to execute a woman in her own home? To pull a trigger while a toddler watches, while seeming perfectly normal to everyone around him? How does a person smile at family gatherings and pass the mashed potatoes and help with the dishes and then go home and commit murder? This is the part that should terrify anyone listening. This is the part that should make you look twice at the people you think you know. Domestic violence does not always announce itself with sirens and flashing lights. It does not always leave bruises you can see on skin or black eyes that make people ask uncomfortable questions. Sometimes it happens behind closed doors in houses that look fine from the outside. Sometimes the monster looks exactly like the nice guy at family dinner who everyone thinks is good for her. Sometimes the killer is the person everyone believed was safe, was stable, was taking care of her and the children they shared. That is what makes this so dangerous. That is what makes it so hard to see coming. Christopher Whitt did not look like a killer to the people who thought they knew him. He looked like a father, a partner, a regular person. Right up until the moment he became the man who put a bullet in Keisha Hilliard's forehead and walked away while her babies cried for the mama who would never answer them again. 11 days. That is how long Christopher Whitt was out there somewhere, breathing free air while Keisha Hilliard lay cold in the morgue. 11 days of Keisha's family wondering where he was, what he was doing, whether he was planning to run forever or turn himself in. 11 days of looking over their shoulders every time they left the house, wondering if he might come back, if he might try to hurt someone else, if there was more violence waiting to happen. 11 days of asking why over and over until the word lost all meaning while he was somewhere hiding, running, pretending he could escape what he had done, as if distance and time could erase a murder. While Christopher Whitt was a fugitive with his face on wanted posters and news broadcasts, Keisha's family was grieving. And they were not grieving quietly in private where nobody could see them. They were not sitting at home waiting for the police to do their job at whatever pace the system moved. They took to social media with the kind of fury that comes from loving someone who was stolen from you. They created a Justice for Keisha Facebook page, posted her picture, the one where she was smiling, where she looked alive and happy and like she had no idea what was coming. Told her story in their own words, made sure people knew her name, knew she was more than just another murder victim, more than just a statistic. Because when the system moves slow and you need answers fast, you make noise. You make sure your loved one is not just another case file collecting dust on somebody's desk while life moves on for everyone else. Donna Hilliard, who had felt that terrible weight in her chest when she could not reach her daughter, spoke directly to Christopher Whitt through the media. She looked into news cameras knowing he might be watching from wherever he was hiding and said these words, "If you are innocent, if you did not do this to my daughter, then just come forward and prove yourself to be innocent." But we already knew he was not innocent. His own son, 3 years old, had told us exactly what happened. Daddy killed Keisha. There was no mystery about guilt. Donna was not asking because she thought there was any chance he had not done it. She was giving him an opportunity to face what he did. To be a man about it for once in his life. To stop running like a coward and answer for taking her daughter away, for making those 5 children motherless, for destroying a family that had done nothing to deserve this kind of pain. The Mesquite Police Department was working the case with everything they had, staying in constant contact with the family, treating this with the absolute seriousness it deserved. This was not some cold case from decades ago or a mystery with no leads. This was a woman murdered in her own home, with her babies present. A crime that happened in broad daylight in a neighborhood where people lived and worked and raised families. That is not something you put on the back burner. That is not something you handle when you get around to it. That demands immediate action, full resources, every available officer looking for the man who did it. But even with all that effort, even with police working around the clock, the family was still confused about something fundamental. Malcolm Hilliard kept saying it over and over to anyone who would listen. They never saw Christopher Whitt be aggressive. Not once. Not ever. Not in all the years he had been part of their lives, eating at their table, spending holidays with them, being around their children. So how do you go from being the man they thought they knew, the man who seemed normal and safe, to shooting a woman in the head while your 3-year-old watches? How does that transformation happen without anyone noticing? Something is wrong. Something is not right with him, Donna said, and she was absolutely correct in every possible way. Something broke inside Christopher Whitt. Or maybe, and this is the scarier possibility, it was always broken and he just hid it well enough that nobody could see the cracks. Maybe the monster was always there, living behind a mask that looked like a regular person. Either way, on October 12th, whatever was wrong with him, whatever darkness had been building, or whatever control he had been maintaining, came out in the most devastating way possible. It erupted into violence that destroyed multiple lives in the time it takes to pull a trigger. The United States Marshals Service got involved in the manhunt. When local police need extra resources and manpower to track down a dangerous fugitive, when someone accused of murder is on the run and time matters, that is who they call. The marshals have jurisdiction across state lines, have resources that local departments cannot match, have experience hunting people who do not want to be found. Christopher Whitt became a priority case. Every day he was out there free was another day Kesha's family could not rest. Another day those kids did not have closure. Another day justice was being delayed while a murderer walked around doing whatever he pleased. People in the community were talking, sharing information on social media, keeping their eyes open wherever they went. Because when something like this happens in your neighborhood, when someone you might have seen at the grocery store or the gas station is murdered and the killer is still loose, you do not just mind your business and pretend it has nothing to do with you. You pay attention, you look out, you watch for suspicious activity, you help however you can because it could have been anyone. It could have been your sister, your daughter, your friend. You help because that is what decent people do when evil comes to their community. And somewhere out there, for 11 days, Christopher Whitt was hiding. Maybe staying with someone who did not know what he had done, who thought he was just a friend who needed a place to crash for a few nights. Maybe moving from place to place. Never staying anywhere long enough for people to ask questions. Maybe sleeping in his car. Maybe looking over his own shoulder every time he heard sirens, wondering if this was the moment they finally caught up to him, if this was where it all ended. But here is the thing about running from murder. Here is what Christopher Whitt should have understood from the beginning. You can run fast if you have a head start and a full tank of gas. You can run far if you have cash and no clear destination, but you cannot run forever, not in a world with cameras everywhere and social media spreading your face to millions of people. Not when you have police departments, U.S. Marshals, and an entire community of angry people looking for you. Not when your own family turned you in and your own son told the truth about what you did. Eventually the running stops. Eventually someone recognizes your face. Eventually you run out of places to hide. Here is the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to examine too closely. Christopher Whitt had 11 days of freedom after murdering a woman in front of children. 11 full days to potentially flee the state or even the country if he had the resources. 11 days to possibly harm someone else, to commit more violence, to destroy more lives. 11 days to get rid of evidence, to throw away the clothes he was wearing, to clean his car, to do whatever he needed to do to make prosecution harder. Why is our system designed in a way that allows violent offenders to disappear for nearly 2 weeks before we manage to catch them? Why do we not have better systems in place for tracking people who commit murder and run? Why does it take this long when we know who did it, when we have witnesses, when we have his name and his face and everything we need except his physical location? Those 11 days gave Christopher Whitt time to think, time to come up with a story. And according to Malcolm Hillard, Christopher used some of that time to write a note, a handwritten explanation that he somehow got to the family. A note where he claimed that he and Kesha were arguing, that a gun went off, that she was hit by a ricochet. An accident, he wanted them to believe, not murder, not execution. Just a terrible accident during an argument where a weapon discharged and tragedy happened. Tell that to a judge, Malcolm said when he heard that story, because that is not what the evidence showed. That is not what his 3-year-old son described to forensic interviewers. That is not what happens when you find a woman with a single gunshot wound to her forehead. Ricochets do not work that way. Accidents do not leave that kind of wound. And even if any part of his story was true, even if there was an argument, you still shot her and left her for dead while your babies cried. That is still murder. That is still a choice you made and must answer for. Thursday, October 23rd, 2025. 11 full days after Kesha Hillard was murdered in her own home. 11 days after Christopher Whitt gathered up those babies and ran into the night. The news finally came, spreading through text messages and phone calls and social media posts faster than official channels could announce it. Christopher Whitt was arrested. Malcolm Hillard found out through a text message from Kesha's daughter, his niece, the girl who had lost her mother and was trying to hold herself together while the world fell apart around her. She told him her mama did it. He stared at the phone, confused, trying to make sense of words that did not seem to fit together in any logical way. "What do you mean?" he texted back. And then the clarification came, the words that made his heart start beating faster. Christopher Whitt had been caught. The man who killed his sister was finally in custody. "I am happy that he is finally off the streets," Malcolm said when reporters asked him how he felt. "It was already bad enough, losing his sister in the most violent way possible. But it is a whole lot better now that we know he is off the street and we finally can get some type of closure behind this situation." Christopher Whitt was booked into Dallas County Jail in the early morning hours of October 24th. 42 years old, the same age Keisha had been when she died, charged with murder. The man who once shared a life with Keisha, who slept in her bed, who ate meals at her table, who had children with her, who was supposed to protect her and keep her safe, was now sitting in a concrete cell wearing an orange jumpsuit, facing the full weight of what he had done. The police affidavit laid out every damning detail in clinical language that somehow made it more horrible. How Christopher Whitt's sister had called 911 on October 12th, requesting that welfare check after her brother told her he had hurt Hillard. How she had arrived at their parents' home to find those two babies dropped off with no supplies, no explanation, nothing. How that 3-year-old, standing there confused and scared, had opened his mouth and said those 3 devastating words that would become the foundation of the entire case. "Daddy killed Kesha." The affidavit detailed what forensic interviewers had learned when they sat down with that little boy in a room designed to look friendly and unthreatening, with soft chairs and toys and people who spoke in gentle voices. How he had watched Christopher Whitt shoot and kill Kesha Hillard. How he had been standing so close to the gunfire that the explosion damaged his ears, that boom that rattled his small skull and made everything sound wrong. A 3-year-old child having to relive the absolute worst moment of his life for investigators, having to describe what he saw in words a toddler should not know, so they could build a case strong enough to put his own father away forever. "It was exciting that he was caught finally," Malcolm said, and you could hear the complicated emotion in his voice. Relief mixed with grief, mixed with anger, mixed with exhaustion. "But you know, it still does not bring my sister back. And that is the reality that nobody wants to face head on. That is the truth that sits heavy in every single one of these cases. Justice does not undo the crime. An arrest does not resurrect the dead or rewind time or give those 5 children their mother back. It just means the person responsible has to face consequences. It means there will be a trial, a conviction, hopefully, a sentence. It means Christopher Whitt will sit in prison thinking about what he did, or maybe not thinking about it at all if he is the kind of person who can murder someone and sleep soundly afterward. But none of that changes the fact that Kesha Hillard is gone forever and her babies are growing up without her. Here is the question that is going to make anyone with a conscience deeply uncomfortable, the kind of question that does not have a clean or easy answer. Should a 3-year-old child be required to testify against his own father in a murder trial? Think about what that means. Really think about it. That child is already traumatized beyond what most adults could handle. He witnessed his father commit murder. He watched the woman who was raising him, who fed him and tucked him in at night and kissed his scraped knees, get shot in the head. He was standing close enough that the gunfire hurt his ears. That image, that sound, that smell is burned into his brain in a way that no amount of therapy will ever fully erase. Now, the legal system, in its need for justice, needs that child to relive that trauma again. To sit in a room full of adults, maybe with his father sitting right there in the courtroom watching him and describe in detail what he saw. To answer questions from prosecutors who need his testimony to convict. To be cross-examined by defense attorneys whose entire job is to poke holes in his story. To make him seem unreliable. To suggest maybe he is confused or making things up, or does not really remember what happened the way he says he does. Is that justice? Or is that re-victimization? Are we protecting that child, or are we using him as a tool to achieve a legal outcome? The prosecution needs his testimony. Without it, the case is still strong because of the physical evidence and the 911 call and everything else. But his words, "Daddy killed Kesha," carry weight that nothing else can match. A 3-year-old does not lie about something like that. A 3-year-old does not have the sophistication to make up a story about witnessing murder. But at what cost to that child? He is going to have to look at pictures of the crime scene possibly. He is going to have to hear adults talk about his father as a murderer. He is going to have to sit there while defense attorneys try to discredit what he saw with his own eyes. And after all of that, after he has done his part to help convict his father, he still has to go home and live with the knowledge that his testimony helped put his daddy in prison forever. How does a child process that? How does he grow up without drowning in guilt even though none of this is his fault? The system does not have good answers to these questions. The law says justice must be served, and sometimes that requires child witnesses. There are protections in place, special interview techniques, closed-circuit television, so the child does not have to be in the same room as the defendant, therapy provided before and after. But none of that changes the fundamental reality that we are asking a traumatized 3-year-old to carry the weight of conviction on his tiny shoulders. Christopher Whitt made that choice when he pulled the trigger with his son watching. He created this impossible situation where justice for Kesha requires traumatizing his own child all over again. That is on him, but the child still has to live with it, still has to be the witness, still has to be the one whose words either put his father away or failed to do so. And either way, he loses. Either way, he is the little boy who had to testify against his daddy for murder. That is an identity he will carry for the rest of his life. The arrest was just the beginning of a long and painful process that will stretch out for months or maybe years. Now comes the legal machinery grinding slowly forward. The lawyers who will argue over every detail. The court dates that get postponed and rescheduled. The preliminary hearings where evidence gets presented and challenged. The trial where that 3-year-old might have to sit in a witness stand and describe what he saw, what he heard, what it felt like when the gun went off so close to his head that his ears rang for days afterward. Where Kesha's family will have to sit in a courtroom day after day, listening to clinical descriptions of how she died, looking at autopsy photos if they are submitted as evidence, hearing experts talk about bullet trajectories and gunshot residue and time of death, where they will have to look across that courtroom at Christopher Whitt sitting at the defense table and know with absolute certainty that he is the reason their daughter, their sister, their friend is never coming home. That is trauma on top of trauma. That is grief that gets reopened and picked at every single time there is a court appearance, every time the case makes the news, every time someone mentions it in passing. That is justice, yes, but it comes with a cost that cannot be measured in dollars or counted in days. It leaves scars that never fully heal. So what now? What happens to those 5 children who lost the person they depended on for everything? The 6-month-old will grow up on stories told by family members who loved Kesha. This is your mama. She loved you more than anything in the world. She would have done anything for you. She held you when you cried. She fed you. She sang to you. But those will always be just words, right? Just stories, just pictures and photo albums, and maybe videos if they are lucky. No actual memories stored in that baby's brain. No feeling of what mama's arms felt like wrapped around them. No sound of her real voice that is not coming through a speaker. That child will grow up knowing they had a mother, but never really knowing their mother. And that is a specific kind of loss that creates a hole nothing else can fill. The 3-year-old has memories, but they are the wrong kind. Not the good memories of mama reading bedtime stories or mama making breakfast or mama kissing scraped knees. He has the memory of watching her die. The kind of memories that wake you up in the middle of the night screaming, drenched in sweat, heart pounding so hard it feels like your chest might explode. The kind that make loud noises terrifying for the rest of your life. A door slamming, a car backfiring, fireworks, thunder. All of it sending you right back to that moment when you were 3 years old and too close to gunfire. The kind that require years of therapy just to begin to unpack, and even then, you never fully recover. You just learn coping mechanisms. You learn how to function around the trauma instead of through it. And the older kids lost their mama and something else equally important. They lost their sense of safety in the world. Because if this can happen to mama, a grown woman who was supposed to be strong and capable of protecting herself, what else can happen? If the man who was supposed to love her could kill her, who else might hurt you when you think you are safe? Can you trust your friends? Your teachers? Future boyfriends or girlfriends? How do you learn to trust anyone when the person who should have been most trustworthy proved to be the most dangerous? Kesha Hillard was 42 years old. She had so much life left to live, so many years ahead of her. Gardens to plant every spring with her hands deep in soil, businesses to build and grow and watch succeed, graduations to attend for all 5 of her children, sitting in those uncomfortable bleacher seats and crying proud tears when each of them walked across the stage. Weddings to plan someday, helping her daughters pick out dresses or her sons choose suits, dancing at receptions and giving embarrassing toasts about when they were babies. Grandbabies to hold eventually, those tiny humans that would have called her grandmother or Nana or whatever name she chose. All of those moments, all of that future, gone, erased, stolen by a man who claimed to love her, but loved control and power more. This case should make everyone who hears it pay closer attention to the people around them. Check on your people. Not just the surface level "how are you" that gets an automatic fine response. Really check on them. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Notice when something feels off, even if you cannot put your finger on exactly what. Believe them when they tell you something is wrong, even if they say it quietly or try to take it back later or make excuses for why it is not that bad. Do not ignore signs just because someone seems nice in public or because they have never been violent in front of you. Do not assume everything is fine just because you have not seen visible bruises or black eyes. And if you are in a situation where you feel unsafe, where your stomach drops every time you hear his car in the driveway, where you find yourself walking on eggshells trying not to set him off, where you are making plans in the back of your mind about how to get out if things escalate, get out now. Do not wait. Do not convince yourself it will get better. Do not stay for the kids or the money or because you do not know where you would go. Call someone, text that hotline, make a plan. Tell someone you trust what is happening because Kesha Hillard should still be here. She should still be planting gardens and raising her babies and living her life. Christopher Whitt took that from her. He took that from her 5 children who will grow up with a mother-shaped hole in their lives. He took that from her family who will never stop grieving. And now he sits in Dallas County Jail where he absolutely belongs, wearing orange, eating prison food, sleeping on a thin mattress, waiting to face whatever comes next in the legal process. But Kesha, she is not waiting for anything anymore. She is not coming back. She is gone forever. And 5 children, one of them barely old enough to form memories, have to figure out how to live in a world without their mama. How to grow up without her guidance. How to navigate childhood and adolescence and adulthood without the person who was supposed to be there for all of it. That is the real legacy of domestic violence. That is what murder leaves behind when the body's buried and the crime scene tape comes down and the news crews move on to the next story. Not just one body in the ground, a whole family destroyed. Parents who have to bury their child instead of the other way around. Siblings who lost someone they loved. A whole community shaken by the realization that this can happen anywhere, to anyone, even on streets that look safe. A whole generation of children carrying trauma they did not ask for and did not deserve, trauma that will shape who they become in ways nobody can fully predict. Here is what nobody wants to say out loud because it is uncomfortable and makes us all complicit. We failed Kesha Hillard, not just Christopher Whitt with his hands and his gun and his decision to pull that trigger. All of us. A system that does not catch warning signs until it is too late. A culture that tells women to work it out. Give him another chance. Think of the children. Do not give up on the relationship too easily. A society that only takes domestic violence seriously after there is a body on the floor and children crying for their mama who will never answer. We failed her because we live in a world where a man can seem perfectly normal to everyone around him right up until the moment he commits murder. Kesha Hillard deserved better than she got. Her children deserved better than losing their mother to violence. And every woman sitting in a dangerous situation right now, wondering if she should stay or go, making excuses for behavior that terrifies her, deserves better too. Do not become a statistic. Do not let someone who claims to love you be the reason you do not wake up tomorrow. Get help. Get out. Get safe. Because there are people who will help you. Resources available. Hotlines you can call, shelters that will take you in. It is not easy to leave. It is terrifying and complicated and hard, But it is possible, and it is better than being dead. Rest in peace, Kesha Hillard. Your babies will know you love them. Your family will make absolutely sure your name lives on. They will tell stories about who you really were, not just how you died. And your story, as painful as it is to hear and tell, is going to save lives. It is going to make someone reading this or watching this realize they need to get out before it is too late. It is going to make someone check on their friend or sister or daughter and actually listen to the answer. It is going to matter beyond just this one tragedy. Your life mattered, you mattered, and you deserve so much better than what you got.